Hello and welcome back to Cult Leader. I'm your cult leader, Spencer Henry, and this week we are talking about the one, the only, Ed Gein. No, cult babes, you're not having deja vu. I did in fact cover this story years ago, like 6 years ago, but after watching the new season of Monster on Netflix, I knew I had to come back and give you the full story because there's a few things I missed in that early episode. And there's also a lot of discrepancies in the Ryan Murphy retelling. So today, we're talking about everything. And I actually went back to my episode from 2019, and it was an experience. I'll tell you that. I do, in fact, call him Ed Gein the entire time. He was an amateur sleuth, okay? But aside from the nostalgia of the old theme song, I will say there was a lot of good information in that episode, and it kind of took me back to a place, a mindset, a moment in time, the early days of cult leaderhood, and it made me feel really good and happy to listen to. I wasn't cringing the whole time. What struck me then and what strikes me now is really the empathy that I felt for, of course, the victims, but also Ed himself. I was hearing a lot of people really surprised that they felt some waves of sympathy for Ed when they were watching the Monster series on him. And I think people were really just surprised to learn about his story and his upbringing, when really that's the thing about true crime. It's rarely just, oh shit, somebody snapped out of nowhere one day and went on a killing spree. More often than not, when you learn about a case like Ed Gein's and you learn about their childhood traumas, you can start to piece together why things played out the way that they did. And it speaks so much to human conditioning, nature versus nurture, and it's why people, myself included, are so interested in hearing these people's stories be told time and time again. In a way, it makes make sense. Today's story in particular has held public interest for so long. How did little Ed Gein, a mama's boy from a small town, become a quote-unquote monster? The inspiration for Psycho, the inspiration for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. How? Well, his early life has been picked apart for decades by biographers, filmmakers, true crime enthusiasts, so there's a decent amount of information out there, but verifying the actual details, trying to gather credible sources from back then, proves to be a feat to this day. I think what can't be argued is the fucked up relationship between Ed and his mom, Augusta. Which, by the way, Laurie Metcalf did a phenomenal job in the show. I was like, is that Aunt Jackie? So excited to see her. She really captured that Bible-thumping, fear of God revivalist energy. By all accounts, what we know of Augusta Gein is that she was very much a product of her environment as well. Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 27th of 1906 to 28-year-old Augusta and 33-year-old George Philip Gein in La Crosse County, Wisconsin. The couple got married in the year 1900, and in 1901, they welcomed their first son, Henry. And then, as mentioned, a few years later, they welcomed their second son, Edward. It was pretty messy inside of the Gein household. George was a very severe alcoholic. He did not have his shit together whatsoever, constantly bouncing around from job to job. At one point, George actually owned a grocery store, I think back in La Crosse, and then sold it because he and Augusta wanted to raise their sons in a more remote environment, which was like a bad call, to be honest. And it's what led them to purchasing that farm that they lived on in Plainfield. As we know, Ed Gein, also known as the Butcher of Plainfield. And many have presumed that George's out-of-control drinking was likely a result of the abuse and controlling behavior from Augusta. And in my initial episode, I had mentioned that George was abusive, which there are plenty of stories out there that back that up. But Augusta was by no means an angel, okay? She had grown up in an insanely religious household herself. And they were Lutherans, I believe, and she wanted to recreate that environment for her own little family. So from a very young age, she was preaching constantly to little Henry and Edward, just giving all the dramatic fire and brimstone shit. You know what I'm talking about. A tent revival doesn't hold a candle to her. And I don't know if it was religious trauma or just major control issues, but Ed and Henry were kept very isolated growing up. They were told to keep their heads down, and Augusta would literally chase people away from them. And her reasoning at the time, because she was a fucking nut job, was she would tell them, like, the world is an immoral place. It's a dirty place. People are filthy. Keep them away. Not a very exciting childhood. An average day for Ed and Henry growing up was getting up, going to school for a couple of hours, and then upon returning home, the rest of the afternoon was pretty much entirely taken up by Augusta preaching to the boys. More about those immoral people out there. Women especially. They are of the devil. They are of sin. And that's personally why I have chosen to marry a man. I believe it. She was telling them all kinds of propaganda, cult babes, from alcohol is of the devil himself to the real dark shit. She loved to preach to them Bible verses that were focused on moida and divine retribution, which is the concept of a supernatural being's punishment for a person's or group's wrongdoing, often described as a direct response to sin or pride. AKA, Augusta's motto was always stay away from pretty much everyone because they are sinners. And there was certainly an unhealthy family dynamic happening. In addition to this, Ed especially had always very much been a mama's boy. But after George died in 1940, that relationship got even more intense. Their father's cause of death was heart failure. It was linked to his drinking problem, most likely. Now it was just the three of them. Henry was 39, Ed 34, and Augusta 62 at the time. It was pretty much said, without being said, that the boys were expected to pick up the slack. Well, men, I should say. Okay, they're both in their fucking 30s at this point. Henry and Ed both worked multiple odd jobs around town in addition to helping take care of the farm so that they could help support their mother. And for Henry, it was more of like a normal societal expectation. Like, oh, great, my dad's dead. These are the cards that I was dealt. I gotta take care of my mother. Whereas Ed was fucking obsessed with his mom, right? A little sicko. She was an angel on earth to him. So he couldn't have been happier than to do whatever he could do to make her happy. He wanted to please mother, which Henry found odd. Okay, he would kind of razz Ed up a little bit every now and again. He'd be like, what's up with you and mom? Why are you so close? Which is fair because it was fucking weird. But I think this drove Ed nuts. I think he couldn't even fathom, like, how could you not be obsessed with mom? With mother. Now, was he putting on mother's clothes and jacking off while wearing them, hanging himself in the closet? We don't know. That's like such a moment in the television series that just came out, right? In Monster, one of the first scenes is Charlie Hunnam just absolutely yanking his hog in this lingerie, but we have no idea whether or not that's true. It's never been verified. It's safe to say we're going to go through a lot of things in this episode that we just don't have answers to. But we are going to next cut to 1944, just a few years after their father George passes away. There is another tragedy for the Gein family. Now, this is one that I'm excited to talk about because it's one that's been highlighted not only in the Netflix series, but also by other media outlets for years, and we've got to talk about it. On May 16th of 1944, Ed and Henry are tending to some work on the farm when a brush fire breaks out after Ed had been burning some vegetation on their property. It was like a controlled fire situation, but it ended up getting completely out of control, and the fire department was called in. When the fire department gets there, they are able to put out the fire, and as soon as they extinguish it, Ed tells them that his brother Henry is missing. Nowhere to be found. He's like, I haven't seen him anywhere. I don't know what happened. And they end up launching a small search party with flashlights and lanterns in hopes of finding Henry. But when they do, he's gone. Face down in the ground. That's right, Henry is dead. Now, in the Netflix show, Ed attacks his brother with an axe, I think, and then drags his body over to this area, blah, blah, blah. The Hollywood dramatization of it all. The Ryan Murphy rework, when in reality, there's nothing that factually suggests Ed had anything to do with his brother's death. After all, Henry's official cause of death was asphyxiation, most likely, according to reports, the aftermath of smoke inhalation. Essentially, he was killed by the fumes from the fire, okay? So why and when did this big rumor start? Let me tell you. There's a biographer who's named Harold Schechter, and he wrote that when they found Henry's body, he had bruises on his head. And that's it. That's why people think there's more to this story. There wasn't a brutal axe slaying, nothing like that. And perhaps there is more to this story, but really it's the authorities' fault on this one because nobody thought to launch an actual inquest into the death of Henry Gein. It was pretty much an open and closed case in their opinion, and to be honest, I think they just didn't want to deal with the paperwork. And, well, it was a different time. We talk about it all the time, but forensics were not what they are now. And there really was no way to definitively say, like, oh yeah, Ed was probably responsible for this. I mean, nobody knew or thought that Ed Gein was a bad person at this point. I mean, I'm sure people in town were talking. Wouldn't you? I mean, they had to have some rumors going around. Trust me, if it happened in the neighborhood where I grew up, where moms gathered on Wednesday mornings for coffee and gossip, they would be talking. Like, oh, the fucking weirdos down the street. Oh my God, yeah. Mother and her 2 sons. Something weird's going on there. Which, pause. Let's also talk about the voice. Can we please? It was an artistic liberty. That is not what Ed Gein sounded like. There was this childlike air to him, if that's the word, sometimes when Ed spoke, but it wasn't the Mrs. Doubtfire voice, as one of you guys put it. I don't know. It was strange. I think I read in an article somewhere that Charlie Hunnam, who plays Ed Gein in the Netflix show, said he got the voice inspiration from hearing part of an interview clip, and he kind of just played off that. I don't know. That's not verbatim. Don't sue me. My only source on that one is my memory, and shaky at best, okay? Anyway, I did actually find an article that reported on Henry's death, and so I wanted to share it because I thought it was interesting. I hadn't come across this before. This is from the Daily Tribune, Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. It says, "Rights today for man who died in fire. Plainsfield, Wisconsin. Funeral services were held here this afternoon for Henry Gein, 42, town of Plainfield farmer who died of a heart attack while trying to protect his farm from the ravages of a grass and brush fire. Mr. Gein, who lived on a farm in the community with his brother Edward and with their mother, Mrs. George Gein, was burning over their marsh Tuesday when the fire escaped control and required the emergency help of a crew of voluntary firefighters. At day's end, with the fire under control, the men returned to their homes when it was discovered that Henry Gein had not come in with the others. A searching party with lanterns and flashlights searched the burned-over area, and in the evening, several hours after the search began, found the dead body of Mr. Gein lying face down. Apparently, the man had been dead for some time when he was found, and it appeared that death was the result of a heart attack, since he has not been burned or otherwise injured, which this must have come out before the actual autopsy. The services this afternoon will be at Galt Funeral Parlors in Plainfield. The Reverend Wisner, new Baptist minister at Plainfield, officiating. Burial will be in Plainfield Cemetery. Mr. Gein is survived by his mother and brother, and he had lived all his life in the Plainfield community and was unmarried. I would like to know more about his life, like the brother, Henry. Did he ever have relationships with girls? I want to know. Or did he just kind of keep it in his pants because of mother? It seems like he had more of a disdain towards their mother from what I've picked up on, like little context clues here and there. He definitely wasn't Ed. So now it's down to 2. I mean, what an unfortunate set of circumstances. The following year would prove to be even harder for Ed, when Augusta suffered from a debilitating stroke, meaning that Ed had to be her full-time caretaker. But while we're talking about this, we have to talk about the dog story. So if you watched the show, if you didn't, no worries. You're getting new information regardless. But in the show, it was so upsetting. In real life, it's worse though. So basically what happened is Augusta had gone over to a nearby neighbor's farm to buy some hay barrels, and when she arrived, she saw the neighbor, who I've only seen referred to as Smith, and he was like beating the shit out of his dog. And then this woman rushes out of his house and is yelling at him like, "Stop beating the dog, stop hurting the dog." He fucking kills the dog in real life. In the show, he doesn't, but in real life, he did kill the dog. And the woman's upset. Augusta's upset, but she's not upset about the dog. She's upset about the woman, because the woman and this fucking Smith guy, loser asshole, were apparently not married. So Augusta calls her a harlot and leaves so upset, and a few days later she had a stroke. In the show, it plays out very differently. Like, Augusta just had a stroke instantaneously upon this encounter, but that is not the case. The stroke was a few days later, and honestly, it's not a surprise this woman had a stroke. I mean, fuck. She lost her husband and then her son, and now she's left with fucking Ed, who adores her, and up until this point hadn't done anything, maybe, other than maybe murder his brother. But really, at this point, he's got a pretty clean rap sheet, but he's fucking weird, okay? She has to know that as his mother. Like, yeah, he's a little strange. And he's obsessed with her. And this woman, Augusta, is so full of hate. It's no surprise to me she ended up having a fucking stroke because, God, was she wound tight. Also ugly as sin, honey. I'm sorry. I know. We're back on our bullshit, okay? Oh, well, sue me. I'm saying things. I'm leaving them in. She was rode hard, put away wet. Not a looker. And she was evil. So I don't give a shit. She was abusive. She was toxic. She was more mad about harlots than dead puppies. Not my kind of gal. She wasn't this angelic vision that Ed viewed her as. So fucking save it. Well, she did have that stroke and she did live for a little while beyond that, but she ended up passing away on December 29th of 1945. And now Ed is all on his own. And you got to picture, it's pretty strange, right? Ed has spent his entire life having his helicopter mother tell him what to do, from what to wear, who to talk to, what to eat. So to go from that to now entirely living on his own, it's a shock to the system. He managed to make it work though, for a little bit until, of course, all hell broke loose. And shit did get weird fast. But again, it's not like his mom died and then he went fucking berserk and started killing people. Keep in mind, she died in December of 1945. His crimes didn't start till much later on. There's no record, no obituary of Augusta that I can share. To be honest, I don't think Ed was capable or had the know-how to put out an obituary in the paper, and money was tight. He was still working odd jobs, and he did sell off a parcel of land that his brother Henry had purchased a few years prior, and also started receiving government subsidiaries for the farm, all of which helped him stay afloat in the home. But the house got weird. It got messy. He boarded up some of the rooms that his mother frequented the most because he just couldn't bear the sight of them. And this is when it's been rumored that he would on occasion go into his mother's sealed off bedroom and put on some of her little outfits, some of her little negligees, okay? I mean, with mother gone and nobody to tell him what to do, or rather what not to do, he ends up getting into some rather interesting eras, mostly with his reading material. And this we absolutely have to talk about, because on the Netflix show, there's this whole storyline about a budding friendship between Ed and this attractive young gal named Adeline. The real Adeline did not look like the actress. She was like in her 50s or something at the time. And I don't know enough about her to really go in on her looks, okay? She didn't look like the actress, I'll tell you that. And she was also fucking weird. I'm sorry, bizarre woman. Right after Ed was arrested, spoiler alert for later on, she spoke to the press and told outlets that the two of them had a 20-year relationship and that he proposed to her, but she turned him down and da-da-da. But then when that story started circulating, it like got picked up and started making the round. She was like, oh, there was no romance, people. Just leave me alone. Let me be. It's like, girl, you did that. Like, you brought it up. But a huge part of Adeline's role in the show was turning Ed onto these comics and pulp magazines, most of which were about this crazy evil Nazi bitch, Elsa Koch. Truly one of the most despicable women of the Nazi regime. May she fucking rot. Garbage ass hag. But these magazines had stories about Elsa's horrific acts, including making a lampshade or having one made out of the tattooed skin of one of the victims of the concentration camps. It's a horrific saga that we'll tackle another day. But there were also magazines found in Ed's belongings that highlighted topics such as moida, necrophilia, and cannibalism. How he obtained these, I'm not sure, but from what I can gather, it wasn't through his friendship with Adeline. But who knows? Maybe it was. Maybe they did have this 20-year blossoming relationship and she couldn't handle the spotlight. I don't know. Now, pertaining to his future crimes, if you were to ask me, I'm like, yeah, maybe he was slightly inspired by these horrific reading materials, but I'm like, we can't forget the fact that Like all of the wild shit his mother had been preaching to him since he came out the womb. That was not a healthy mindset to have. It was like religious psychosis. She's touting to him all his life, women are evil, people are sinners, stay away from them. But now moving into the crimes, it was in 1947, 2 years after his mother passed away, that Ed actually started committing the crimes he became so infamous for. 1947 to 1952 are the real pivotal years here. It was between this time frame that Ed had started paying visits to 3 different local cemeteries, and while some of the time he was just digging around a little, leaving empty-handed, other times he began bringing home souvenirs, we'll say. According to Ed, this was done in a daze, which I was thinking about. So I'm a sleep eater, right? And I'm not trying to be funny here. I will sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, walk into the kitchen, grab a snack, and immediately go back to sleep. Sometimes I remember it, sometimes I don't. I wake up and see a wrapper and I'm like, huh. But I know the feeling of being in an absolute daze. You're like half awake, half not. And it's what I imagine this time felt like for Ed. I've also spoken in great detail about grief on both here and Obituary and how it feels like life is sometimes just pulling you through it, dragging you along, and it's almost like you don't have a choice. You're not fighting it. You're just kind of going along with it, if that makes sense. If you've been depressed before, you get it. So Ed, from what he told investigators later on, was just in this daze, right? He's going to the cemeteries at night and, well, unfortunately, he starts taking bodies home with him. Of the 40 or so trips he took to the local cemeteries between those years, he ended up stealing a total of 9 bodies. When he was going through the different cemetery plots, he wasn't always stumbling across fully intact bodies, but that's really what he was after. Ed would go and visit the graves of middle-aged women who served as some sick reminder of his mother, and he would wait a few days after they were buried, and then he would go in, crack open the casket, and take the corpses home. A real sick puppy. But in 1954, he, for whatever reason, wasn't satisfied with the corpses anymore. He wanted fresh skin. This was the year he committed his first confirmed murder. The victim? A woman named Mary Hogan. Mary owned a local tavern in Plainfield and had actually moved to Wisconsin from Illinois a few months prior. What we know about Mary is that she was born in Germany and she was kind of a paranoid gal, like only opened her tavern during the day because she was scared of strangers. Kind of ironic. And she actually lived in a unit that was attached to the tavern. And I have an article that went out shortly after her disappearance from the Daily Tribune, December 9th, 1954. This was when she was missing. It says, believe Bancroft tavern keeper was slain. Quote, it says, no trace of a Portage woman tavern keeper believed shot and hauled away from her tavern in a truck had been found by central Wisconsin authorities up to noon today. Portage County Sheriff Harold Thompson issued a statewide alarm for Miss Mary Hogan, 55. After evidence of a shooting at her tavern was uncovered late Wednesday afternoon. Officers found blood in the ransacked tavern located 5 miles southwest of Bancroft on County Trunk Drive, and indications that someone had been dragged into the yard. The state crime laboratory completed its investigation at the scene this morning. An empty .32 caliber cartridge was found on the floor of the blood-soaked barroom, and crime lab technicians reportedly told Sheriff Thompson that the amount of blood lost by the shooting victim, assumed to be Miss Hogan, precludes the possibility of her still being alive. The shooting is believed to have occurred around 5:15 p.m. Wednesday. It was discovered a short time later by Seymour Lester, who lives about a mile from the tavern and had gone there to purchase ice cream. Neighbors reported seeing a 1951 green Dodge pickup truck, which had been parked next to the tavern during the afternoon, speeding west on a country trunk road. There was some delay in notifying police, Thompson said, since Lester first reported to Villas Waterman, Town of Pine Grove supervisor, that it appeared there had been a fight at the tavern. It was not until about 6 p.m. that the sheriff's office was notified, and Wood County authorities were not alerted to watch for the truck until about 6:45 p.m. Sheriff Arthur E. Berg said he and officers Donald Kaler and Dave Sharkey and Deputy Earl Tess patrolled Southwood country roads until midnight. Neither the truck nor any signs that a body might have been disposed of in this county were detected. Thompson said the investigation conducted so far indicated Miss Hogan was drinking a cup of coffee when the intruder entered. He said a spilled coffee cup was found near the center of a table, and the chair next to the table was overturned. Robbery was the apparent motive, since a cash box had been emptied and a roll of nickels and 2 $1 bills were found on the barroom floor. Crime lab investigators found Miss Hogan's gun in a drawer in the tavern's back room. It is a .38 caliber revolver, and police said it had not been fired. Thompson said he believes whoever robbed the tavern is responsible for the tavern keeper's disappearance, and was likely someone she knew. Miss Hogan was characterized by Thompson as a large woman, well able to take care of herself. She was unmarried and had no known relatives in the area. She lived at the back of the beer tavern. A little blunt. Now, several suspects were looked into, mostly men in the area who drove trucks like the one seen departing the scene of the crime. However, it's a misconception that Ed drove a truck. He's been depicted in several series now driving a truck, when in fact he drove a 1949 Ford sedan. Mary Hogan's death would unfortunately go unsolved for a few more years, until another murder in town led police to the answers that they'd long been searching for. But before we get there, we gotta talk about Ed's second confirmed murder, because this is what led to the downfall. An unraveled everything. Years of what the fuck is going on here? Okay, years of it. On November 16th of 1957, Frank Warden, a police officer himself, came to the authorities extremely concerned for the well-being of his mother, Bernice. Huge issue here with the Netflix show. They made it seem like Ed and Bernice had some sort of relationship going on. This could not be further from the truth. There is zero evidence of any relationship outside of customer-employee. Ed shopped at the local hardware store that Bernice owned, and that's that. In fact, if you really want me to blow your minds right now, Ed told investigators later on that because of what his mother pressed into him about not sleeping with the harlots and whatnot, he never had a sexual encounter of any kind. That includes with the bodies he exhumed from the graves. Apparently, he even told one officer that the smell of the corpse drove him away. So I don't know. It's a lot of Hollywood hearsay. But back to Bernice. So her son, Frank, right? He goes into the store one morning. His mom hadn't shown up for work, I guess. Someone called him. And he goes into the store and sees a very unsettling scene. There's a pool of blood on the floor and his mother is nowhere in sight. After some digging around, officers discover a receipt that leads them to one of the last customers Bernice had written a receipt for. The name? Ding, ding, ding. Ed Gein. And boy, they were in for far more than they bargained for when they pulled up to Ed's farm on that dreary November day. So let's talk about what they found, shall we? Well, they found the bodies of Mary Hogan and Bernice Warden. But that was really just the beginning. I talked about the contents of Ed Gein's house on a recent obituary episode, so this might feel a little repetitive if you've listened to that one already, but I'm trying to hit every angle here, okay? First of all, there were a lot of jars around the house full of various organs and whatnot, and the infamous skull bowls that are highlighted in the Monster series as well. Those are real. Officers found multiple skulls, all of which he had to boil these heads, completely deflesh them, pull out all the hair, everything. Just, bleh, it's gross. There were dozens of skull caps found on the property, and Ed told police that he would remove the skin first and then boil the skulls in a mix of water and household chemicals to loosen up the tissue, hair, and remaining flesh. And he also reportedly went through a lot of lye. After that, he would scrape them clean and then let them dry before cutting off the top portion to take the skull caps and use the rest of the skull as the bowls. I guess investigators reportedly said that they realized Ed was probably an expert because he had previously worked in a nearby slaughterhouse. But most of what they found came from the 9 graves that he had admitted to disturbing rather than his 2 murder victims. Perhaps one of the most shocking items found in Ed Gein's home were these paper bags that the officers opened, and they pulled out just full human faces, almost like a mask, but it was skin that had been perfectly removed from their face. How do you open a fucking paper bag and pull out a face and like just go about your day after that? They also found the infamous torso skin garment with the breast attached to it that he admitted to wearing from time and time again. And it was very much a Frankenstein situation. Multiple pieces of skin stitched together. The breast, obviously, it wasn't just like one full thing he skinned off of somebody. This was multiple bodies put together. They also found lampshades and chairs like he had read about in those fucked up magazines. And he would upholster them with human skin. And if you're wondering how did the skin stay intact, he treated it just like animal hide. He would use salt and borax to dry the skin out first so that it became almost like leather, a stiff leather. And then because it had that tougher exterior, he could then stretch it out and it wouldn't rip. Sometimes he did occasionally get tears in the skin. So that's why if you take a close look at a lot of the objects that were found in his home, it's a lot of patchwork. Very messy. In addition to the lampshade and chairs, they found a wastebasket made of human skin, a pair of leggings, 9 vulvas in a shoebox, 4 noses. And the one that's probably the most insane to me, honestly, is there was a drawstring, which I know I talked about in the first episode I did on this, but there was a drawstring for like a window, and the handle of the drawstring was a pair of human lips, which I'm like, how? Like, my lips feel chapped when the weather drops a little colder. I'm like, imagine if they weren't on my body. Like, did he have to put chapstick on them? I don't know. I think the most shocking discovery on the property, which I think was actually one of the first, was when they went out to the barn shed on the farm and they found the body of Bernice Worden, who was hanging up on a metal cross, mutilated, skinned, and completely decapitated. Her head was later found in a burlap sack nearby. Art Schlee, one of the sheriffs who handled the Ed Gein case, I was reading a story that when he was questioning and interviewing Ed, he actually bashed Ed's head up against like a brick wall, just like completely fucked him up because he was just so upset by the sight. And can you fucking blame him? I mean, God, it's unsettling. But the sheriff, he died when he was just 43 years old, and many have said his premature death was likely due to dealing with this case. He died of heart failure. Another key player who led the investigation was, of course, the one who had tipped it off in the first place. Bernice Worden's son, Frank, who happened to be a police officer, as I mentioned, and identified Ed as a suspect. He was unfortunately one of the officers who witnessed the atrocities firsthand. I don't know if he was allowed in the barn or if he saw that, but you can't fucking imagine. I mean, what do you do? He surprisingly did live a pretty long life. He died in 2001 at the age of 78, and after all the news broke, it was such a shit show, like the media storm and frenzy that surrounded this, that he did his best to maintain his privacy throughout the rest of his life and live a life completely out of the spotlight. Needless to say, Ed was placed under arrest, and on November 21st, he was arraigned on one count of first-degree murder for the murder of Bernice Worden, but he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. And I still don't know why it was just that one. Like, he admitted to killing Mary Hogan, and her literal body was found in the house. So why things went that way, I'm not sure. I do know that he was tested during this time, like psychological test, and they diagnosed him with schizophrenia and declared him not competent to stand trial. So instead, they sent him out to the Mendota Mental Institution. But a year later, they pull him out and put him back on trial. But then they're like, I mean, he's guilty, but he's also crazy. So they end up finding him guilty by reason of insanity. And Ed is sentenced to spend the rest of his life institutionalized, which he was until his death in 1984, when he passed away from complications due to lung cancer at the age of 77 years old. And no, he didn't kill a nurse while he was in there. Another fabrication on the Netflix show. After his arrest, they tried to, understandably, connect Ed to other nearby murders that remained cold. But again, it's not like what it's painted to be in the Netflix series. For instance, Evelyn Hartley, who's played by Addison Rae on the Netflix show, Evelyn in real life was a 15-year-old babysitter who vanished from La Crosse, Wisconsin, about 50 miles from Plainfield, where Ed was born. La Crosse. There was blood, footprints, and signs of a struggle found, but her body was never recovered. Well, Ed was in the area at the time, and investigators later tried to link him to her case, but no evidence was found at his property, so they have no idea. But in the show, they very much allude to the fact that Ed killed her. Nor did he kill lost hunters with a chainsaw, as is depicted in this series. He was thought to possibly be involved in the disappearance of some local hunters, mainly this guy, Victor Travis, who went missing alongside two of his pals. But there's no evidence Ed had anything to do with their disappearances. In fact, I believe that one still remains unsolved to this day as well. Another notable case that he was thought to be involved with involved a missing 8-year-old girl named Georgia Heckler, who went missing in 1947 in a nearby area. But again, nothing tying Ed to that case either, and it too remains unsolved. We're gonna wrap things up here, but before I go, let's clear up my biggest gripe with the Netflix series, because Ed Gein certainly did not help catch Ted Bundy. But interestingly enough, the FBI did pay a visit to Ed at the institution to see if he could help them learn more about a potential suspect in the killings. Nor was there some dramatic correspondence between serial killer Richard Speck and Ed Gein. Simply did not happen. But now I think I'm finally ready to bury this case. I will see you next time, and until next time, the Ed Gein story is crazy enough. There's no need to add the Hollywood fluff. Goodbye.